welcome back to this video. This is a continuation of the C# beginner series. In this video, we'll be looking at what if, else, and the else if in C# is. Now this, as you remember in the last video, we spoke are under the conditional statements. So the if, the else, and the else if, these are statements that are used for conditional branching that allows you to execute different blocks of code based on the evaluation of certain conditions. Let's look at this with an example. So let's say we are going to the market, and I wanted you to, when you get to the market, to buy fish if the money you have is enough to for the fish. So in that situation, we'll be asking ourselves when we get to the market, do we have enough money for the fish? And if we do, we buy the fish. So basically, if I was to write this as a program, so let me remove this hello world from here, clean this up. So I will say, for example, I will need to have something to tell me if I have enough money. Have enough money. So let's just say have enough money, and let's say we have enough money. So the way the if statement works is, it works like if, and then we have a condition here, we have a condition there, and then we execute what we want. So what is going to happen here is that if this condition is true, then it will execute what is inside it. This is how the if statement looks like in C#. So for example, I can say if I have enough money, then I want to console log that buy a fish. So basically, so if I have enough money, then I am to buy a fish. Basically, that was the instruction I was given. So as we are going to the market, when we get to the market, we evaluate, do we have enough money? And if I have, so if you have enough money, console log buy a fish. Basically, that's what the if statement is basically. So, but let's say I want to do it in a different way. Let's say I want to say amount of money. So let's say I was given 1,000, and I went to the market and I found out that the cost of fish, so let's have another variable called cost of fish. Let's say this is 400. Let's use 400. So what should happen is, when I get to the market, I should check if the amount of money is more than or equals to the cost of the fish, then I can go ahead to buy the fish. So I could just, instead of this, I could just say if the amount of money, if it's greater than or equals to the cost of fish, then you can go ahead to buy the fish. So if we run this program now, of course, we will see that it goes ahead to buy the fish because the amount we have here is 1,000 and the cost is 400. So definitely it is sufficient enough to buy the fish. And as you can see in our program here, it actually console logs buy a fish. So, but let's say, for example, the cost of a fish is 1,400. If I run this program now, we will be seeing that actually it doesn't console log anything. We see no response. There's no response for us. So it's telling us that it was unable to buy the fish. So let me just have a console.readline here just to keep it clean and we can focus on. So we see here that when we check, the amount of money is not greater than or is not equal to the fish, so we don't buy the fish. So you see it's empty. But I come here now and I say, okay, maybe I gave you 18,000, and if we run this again now, you see it will say buy a fish, as we see here. So that is basically the if statement. Now what if, when I sent it to the market, I told you that if the money is not sufficient to buy a fish, then I want you to buy meat. So it means that if the amount of money is not sufficient, that means the money I gave you is less than or equals to the cost of it, then I want. So for that, I could come and say if the amount of money, amount of money, if it's less than the cost of fish, then I want to console log buy a meat. And so if I run this now, we see that it says buy a fish. We don't see buy a meat because we have enough money to buy a fish. So, but if we come here now and I make this 1,000 and I run this again now, what we'll find out is that it goes ahead to buy a meat because the money is not sufficient to buy a fish. But now, if you look at these two statements, it's either you buy a meat or buy a fish. You can't buy the both because the instruction we are given is if it's enough for a fish, buy a fish. If it is not enough for a fish, then buy a meat. So this is where we have the if-else statement. So basically, you see, I just change this to else and we don't have this anymore. So here I'm saying if the amount of money is greater than or equals to the cost of a fish, then we console log that we buy a fish. Else, if it is not, if this statement is not true, then the else is what is wrong. So that is where we have the if else. So when you have a kind of flow where you want to perform one condition or the other condition based on a criteria, then we can use the if else statements as we see here. So we see here it says buy a meat, and if by chance we get some money and we try to run the application again, we see that this time it says buy a fish because it has sufficient to buy the fish. So basically this is the if and the else statement. But what if I said that when you get to the market, if you have enough money to buy a fish, then buy the fish. But if you don't have enough money to buy a fish, then buy a meat. But what if the money is not also enough to buy a meat? Then I want you to tell you that maybe buy a chewing gum, bubble gum. So how do we write that? So I will say, because if I have enough money for the cost of fish, then that's fine, I buy the fish. But if I don't have enough money for the cost of fish, but I have enough money for the cost of a meat, so let's have cost of meat here. And let's say the cost of meat is maybe it's cheaper, so 400. So we'll be asking here, else, if the amount of money I have is greater than or equals to the cost of meat. So I am saying here, if the money is more than that of a fish, we buy the fish. If it is not, then we check, is the money more than that of a meat? If it is, then we buy the meat. But if it is not, then that is where we have the else. So I'm just telling you to console log buy a chewing gum. So basically that's our program now. So we are saying if the amount is enough to buy the cost to buy a fish, then buy a fish. Else, if it is enough to buy a meat, then we buy a meat. But if it is not any of these two, then I want you to go ahead to buy a chewing gum, basically. So that is our control flow. So if we were to run this now, because our amount of money is 10,000, definitely what we will be seeing here is that it will buy a fish. But if the cost is more than that of a cut of fish, but is greater than that of the meat, so for example, as we see here, so if I run this now, you see it says buy a meat. It goes ahead to buy a meat because when it checks for the fish and it asks the cost of a fish, oh, it's more than the cost of a fish, so it goes ahead and it says it cannot buy a fish. It wouldn't go into this code block because this amount here is 1,000 and is not more than 1,400. So it comes here and says the amount we have is 1,000 and the cost of a meat is 400. So this is the condition it satisfies and it does this. But what if, for example, let's say we just have 200 and we run this now, we'll see that it says buy a chewing gum because it doesn't satisfy any of the if or else if statements, so it falls back to the else statement. So the else statement is like the fallback. If none of the other conditions are satisfied, then it goes into the else. But if any of the conditions prior to it are satisfied, then it goes to that branch. Now, it's also important that you note that, as we have always said, it goes from top to bottom. So it evaluates this statement before it goes to the next else if. So for example, let's say I put the cost of meat here before I put the cost of fish. Now, if we run this, let's see what happens. Okay, so this is definitely going to be buy chewing gum. So, but let's say I gave it 20,000. So definitely we were expecting him to go and buy a fish because we gave him enough money, which is more than that of the cost of a fish. But when we run the application, let's see what we have. We see that it goes ahead. Okay, sorry, permit me to correct this. So let's say if the amount of money is more than the cost of meat, I want to buy a meat. And if it's a fish, I want to buy a fish. So let's run the application again and see what we have. So, I'm saying if the amount of money is more than the cost of a meat, I want to buy a meat. If it's more than the cost of a fish, I want to buy a fish. But you see, because I changed the order, it is going to go into buy a meat because the amount of money is also more than that of a meat, and that is the first condition it's going to hit. So it will go sequentially. So if, and because I know my cost of fish is always going to be more than the cost of meat, the ideal will be to put the cost of fish, check that condition first before I check the condition for that of a meat, because I know the cost of a fish will always be more than the cost of a meat. So it's just something we need to be careful about when we are writing our applications, that the order in which we write our if statement is the order in which our program or application is going to run through it. So let's say, for example, also here, we are saying that, okay, so if you have enough money, so let me just correct this back. So cost of fish, and then we have this is a fish, we want to buy a fish, and then if it's a meat, we're saying we want to buy a meat, and then this will be the cost of meat here. So let's now say if we, for example, let's say I didn't give the person money and the amount of money I gave was maybe very small and cannot even buy a chewing gum. So I want to tell you, come back home empty-handed. So in that situation, I will now say, so allow me to add another variable, let's say cost of chewing gum, and let's say that's 20. And I'm now saying else if the amount of money is greater than or equals to the cost of a chewing gum, that is when I want to do this. And then if it doesn't fall into any of this, then I want you to console log that issue come home empty. So let's say this is what I have. I could run this now, and because of course this is 20,000, so it will be buy a fish. But let's make this let's say 2, and I run this. Definitely the amount is less than this. It's less than, it doesn't satisfy any of the 3 conditions, so we see it says come home empty. So it's important. Why I'm doing this is to show that we can have multiple else if statements. So we can have else if 3, 4, 5, it's fine. But you cannot have the if or else multiple times. So the if will always be the first and the else will always be the last. So if I try to move this from here and I try to put it here, the compiler will be complaining because it's saying, okay, this else, it sees this as the end and it's wondering where this else if is coming from. So that's something else we should note. So this basically is the if, the else if, and the else statement. On the last note, I want to say that the if and the else if can be used without the else also. So for example, let's say if is not enough to buy anything, I do not want to console log anything, I don't want to show anything, I could remove the else, and in this situation you remember that the amount of money is 2, so there is no F statement. Since it did not satisfy any of the 3 conditions, it just does nothing because that is what I wanted to do at this particular time. So this is the if, the else if, and the else statement. And this is how it is applied in C#. Thank you for watching. I will see us in the next video, where we'll be having a small example building up on our calculator example that we've done previously. We'll be trying to use the if, the else, and the else if to build up on our calculator. Thank you, and see you in the next video.